Hey guys, tonight we step into a world you've already lived in, but can't remember. A foggy realm at the very start of your life, where your eyes opened, your lungs took in air, and the world began to imprint itself on you, and yet, somehow, all of it slipped away. We're about to tiptoe through your earliest years, the ones that exist in photos, in stories your family tells, but not in your own mind. Before we begin tonight's journey of discovery, I just have a small favor to ask. If you're enjoying this peaceful little corner of science, feel free to hit the like button or subscribe so you won't miss any of our upcoming nighttime explorations. It really helps this small channel grow, and it means a lot to me. If you're still awake enough to type a few words, I'd love to know. Where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it where you are right now? There's something so lovely about seeing science quietly stretch across time zones, shared together in stillness. I truly hope this story is gentle enough to help you drift off to sleep. But there's always a small risk. It might be too interesting. And if you do stay awake through the whole thing, at least you'll walk away with a bit of new knowledge. And honestly, that's not a bad reason to lose a little sleep. Now, take a deep breath in and slowly exhale. Let's begin. You open your eyes to a world filled with light, sound, and touch, and yet none of it sticks. You see the outline of faces hovering above you, hear the muffled laughter of someone who must love you, feel the warmth of skin pressed against yours. But it's like trying to hold mist in your hands. These moments exist, but they do not settle into memory. They pass over you like wind over grass, stirring, but not staying. You're less than a year old. The world is brand new, but your brain is ancient. Millions of years of evolution compressed into a head that's still, quite literally, soft in places. You're born with more neurons than you'll ever use, and they're firing signals in all directions, trying to find meaning in the blur. Your brain is growing faster than it ever will again, forming connections at lightning speed. It's chaos in there, beautiful chaos. But here's the twist. Even with all this neural activity, you're not really making memories the way you will later in life. Not the kind you can narrate or revisit like a story. These earliest experiences are absorbed into your biology like ingredients into a simmering soup, altering the flavor, but never standing out on their own. They shape who you become, but they vanish as themselves. You float through this beginning like a jellyfish, sensing, reacting, drifting. There's no language to anchor thoughts, no sense of self, no idea that time moves forward or that you even exist in it. Everything is now, and now is everything. Scientists call this infantile amnesia, the near universal inability to remember anything from before age 3, and for something that happens to every one of us. It's surprisingly mysterious. No one fully understands why your brain just lets it all go. You had the machinery, the experiences, the input, but not the output, not the record. Some researchers point to the hippocampus, that little seahorse-shaped structure nestled deep in your brain. It's essential for turning short-term experiences into long-term memories. And in babies, it's still maturing. It's working, just not at full power. It's like trying to film a movie on a camera that's still assembling itself. And then there's the cortex, the part that helps you make sense of those memories. It's learning to process images, sounds, touch, but it doesn't yet have a filing system. So even if the memory arrives, It gets lost in the mess, misplaced before it can be stored. You're building the library while the books are already being delivered, and no one's labeling the shelves. You might think it's a flaw, a tragic loss, but it's not. It might be essential. You're taking in far more sensory input than an adult ever could. Everything is new. Everything is loud, bright, strange. You can't afford to hold on to all of it. So you don't. You feel the experience. You absorb the warmth, the fear, the softness of a blanket, the wet chill of a bottle, and then you let it go. Some of those sensations will become implicit memories, the kind your body remembers, even if your mind doesn't. The way you settle when you hear a familiar lullaby, the instinct to reach for a hand when you're scared. These are echoes of your early life, built into your wiring. But as for events, the time you giggled at your first pet or screamed at your first thunderstorm, those are gone, not erased, not destroyed, just unrecalled. Scientists still debate whether those early memories are completely lost or simply inaccessible, stored in a language you no longer speak. You step through this fog of the past, feeling its shape more than seeing it. The world around you has grown familiar, but that familiarity wasn't documented by you. It was built for you, by caretakers, by routines, by the quiet repetition of feeding, bathing, cuddling. They became your world before you ever knew you had one. And now, as you lie here listening, trying to remember something that never had a chance to become a memory, you're not failing. You're simply remembering the way a wave remembers the shore, not in snapshots, but in rhythm, in feeling, in the soft push and pull of emotion and presence, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. You're still floating through those early years, but now the haze begins to thin. It's not that memories start forming in full, not yet, but something's shifting behind the scenes. If you could peek inside your brain right now, you'd see a construction zone buzzing with activity, not metaphorically, literally. Neurons are reaching toward one another like curious fingers, forming synapses faster than they ever will again. It's loud in there. Sparks fly as signals leap from cell to cell, laying down the infrastructure for everything you'll one day think, feel, and remember. You're about 1 year old now, maybe less, maybe a little more. Your brain weighs more than it did at birth. It's growing rapidly, soaking up calories like a sponge. Most of your energy is going straight into that soft skull of yours. No wonder you're sleepy all the time, and cranky. Honestly, being a baby is hard work. You're trying to build a supercomputer out of raw jelly, and yet, memory is still slippery. You might have the occasional flash of something, a sound that makes you smile, a texture that feels familiar, but real, structured memory, the kind that fits into a timeline that you can tell yourself in a sentence, that's not quite here yet. You're still in the before times, the blueprint stage. You're building the factory before the product starts rolling out. A major player in all of this is your hippocampus. You remember it, the seahorse-shaped structure nestled deep in your brain, named for its resemblance to something that swims. And right now, it's still growing, still figuring out how to process space, time, and the difference between a fleeting impression and a lasting memory. It's trying, really, but it's not done baking yet. And because of that, you're living in the present in a way that adults can barely imagine. Everything is now. You're not reflecting on yesterday or anticipating tomorrow. You don't even know what tomorrow is. You are fully immersed in each moment, the way sunlight feels on your cheek, the taste of mashed banana, the sound of a dog barking. You are, for a time, the purest version of awareness, all input, no commentary. Now, pause, take that in for a second. The fact that your brain is exploding with growth, and yet you can't remember it, that's not a failure. That's design. You're not meant to be recording just yet. You're still building the cameras, setting up the reels, learning where to store the film. And while that's happening, you get the rare gift of existing without narrative. There's no inner monologue, no comparisons, no pressure, just being. But don't get too comfortable, because the scaffolding is going up quickly. Soon you'll start organizing thoughts into categories. You'll begin to recognize patterns, predict what happens next. You'll learn that certain sounds mean food, and certain faces mean safe. And that banging two blocks together is strangely satisfying. You're developing what scientists call cognitive schemas, little frameworks that help you sort the chaos into something resembling order. This is the architecture that will support your memories later. Without these frameworks, memories don't have anything to latch on to. Imagine trying to hang a painting on a wall that hasn't been built yet. That's what remembering is like without these mental structures. And yours are just now starting to rise. You're also learning a lot from movement. Every time you crawl, toddle, reach, or wobble, your brain is mapping space. That sense of where you are is essential for memory, especially episodic memory, the kind that ties events to a place and a time. You're developing spatial awareness, and that's laying the groundwork for remembering events in context. But here's the catch. While this foundation is being laid, much of what you experience still won't stick. It's like writing messages in wet cement. The marks seem clear for a moment, but they're slowly erased as the cement shifts and reshapes itself. Your brain is not a stable canvas yet. It's dynamic, constantly rewiring, optimizing, trimming what it doesn't need. And, oh, does it trim. You've probably heard about synaptic pruning, the process where your brain starts to cut away connections it isn't using. It's not a ruthless gardener, more like a thoughtful sculptor. Those neurons that fire together more often, they get reinforced. The ones that rarely communicate, they're quietly retired. And during this time, a lot of potential memories get swept away in the cleanup. Not because they weren't important, but because the system had to choose. Space is finite. Efficiency matters. Meanwhile, your senses are working overtime. Every sound, smell, and texture gets cataloged, if only for a little while. Some sensations are so intense that they trigger reflexive responses. Crying, cooing, clenching your fists. Your brain is figuring out how to respond to the world. And even though these experiences won't become retrievable memories, they do become part of your emotional landscape. That's key. Emotional tone. You won't remember the specific moment you were rocked to sleep in someone's arms, but you might carry the calm that came with it, or the distress if the rocking stopped too soon. These feelings embed themselves deep in your nervous system, shaping your reactions long after the memory itself is gone. In a way, you're not storing data, you're storing mood. Scientists still debate whether early experiences are completely wiped or just locked away. Some believe those memories were never encoded fully in the first place. Others think they're stored, but filed under formats we can't decode anymore, like floppy disks in a USB world. The information might still be there, but we've lost the means to access it. And maybe that's for the best. Because right now, in this swirling mix of growth and forgetting, you're being allowed to simply be, to observe the world without commentary, to feel deeply without explanation, to learn without expectation. It's a kind of innocence that doesn't come back, not because it disappears, but because it transforms. Like steam rising from a hot bath, it vanishes into the air, but leaves warmth behind. You reach for a toy, and your brain reaches too, extending neurons toward understanding. You taste something sweet, and somewhere in your cortex, pleasure registers. You fall down, and pain is noted, not remembered as a scene, but felt as a lesson. Slowly, gently, your world begins to take shape. And when you sleep, which you do often, your brain quietly replays what it can. Sorting, editing, filing. Not every experience will make it till morning, but some do. A few flickers, a rhythm, a scent, the start of what memory might one day become. So here you are, still without a past, but full of potential. A little brain, big with promise, drifting peacefully through the beginning of everything. You're sitting in a high chair now, fingers covered in something sticky. Maybe applesauce, maybe something more mysterious. A spoon appears in front of your face, and you stare at it with the intense curiosity only a toddler can muster. You open your mouth. You don't know why. You don't remember doing it yesterday. But somehow you know this is what you're supposed to do. The world is teaching you routines, and your brain is learning to follow along, even if it's not writing anything down. Here's the thing about time. You don't understand it yet. Not really. You know hunger. You know sleepiness. You know the warmth of someone's arms, the sudden cold of being set down. But days, weeks, later, none of that exists. The future is not a concept in your world. It's a mystery, a place you haven't built a doorway to yet. And the past, it's even more abstract. If you don't understand that something happened before something else, how can you remember a sequence? Without a timeline, there's nowhere for memory to land. This is one of the key reasons your earliest memories never stuck. Your brain didn't yet understand the structure of time. Memory, at its core, is about placing experiences within a frame. This happened before that. This led to that. But for you, back then, everything just was, like floating in a lake with no shore in sight. All water, no direction, and time is deeply connected to language. Without words, you can't label events. You can't name what hurt or what you loved. You can't mentally whisper to yourself, "That was scary," or "That was fun." You feel everything, but you don't narrate. And narration is how we remember. It's the difference between experience and story. As you begin to babble, mama, ball, dog, you're starting to carve little handles onto your memories. Suddenly, there's a word for the thing you felt yesterday. That thing might come again. More? Again? No. These tiny words are more than communication. They're mental glue. You're learning to categorize your life, to stitch events together with labels and emotion. Your sense of self is forming too. You're starting to understand that you are separate from others, that your actions have consequences, that you are the one reaching, pushing, giggling, crying. And this awareness, this sense of me, is crucial for autobiographical memory. It's the mirror that lets you recognize yourself in a story. Before that, there was no you, just experience, just light and shadow, hunger and fullness, comfort and confusion. And still, your days blur together. That's normal. You wake up, you're fed, you play, you nap, you play again. Someone smiles at you, and your body knows that's a good thing. You cry, and someone responds. These moments feel eternal when they're happening, and they vanish the moment they end. You live a life full of firsts, but they arrive without fanfare. Your first steps, your first fall, your first time realizing you can make someone laugh. All of it passes without being filed away. Imagine watching a movie that's been beautifully shot but never edited. Scene after scene, vivid and rich, but with no transitions, no order. That's what your early years are like. A string of unconnected impressions, full of color but missing narrative. The director is filming, but the editor hasn't shown up yet. And yet, some things linger. Even now, you might hear a lullaby and feel an inexplicable warmth, or smell a certain lotion and be transported to a feeling, not a scene, not a place, but a deep, bodily knowing that this was once familiar. These are called sensory memories, and they're powerful. They slip beneath the level of words, bypass the need for story. Your brain doesn't always need to remember something to react to it, and sometimes this memory-less world feels safer. There are no regrets, no expectations. You don't compare yesterday to today. You don't worry that tomorrow will be harder. You're just here, present, entirely immersed in now. There's something beautiful in that, something we spend the rest of our lives trying and failing to get back to. At this age, repetition becomes your favorite thing, not because you remember the song from yesterday, but because each time it's sung, it feels oddly satisfying, familiar, even if you don't know why. This is how your brain begins to build comfort, by layering similar experiences until they form a groove. Neural pathways deepen with each repeated melody, each recurring face, each consistent bedtime routine. And eventually, some of these repeated patterns cross a threshold. They become retrievable. You might remember the feeling of your favorite stuffed animal, the way it smelled, the way it fit under your arm. You won't recall where you got it or when, but your body will remember the comfort. These implicit memories, the ones tied to touch, emotion, rhythm, are your first real souvenirs from childhood. Fragile, but lasting. Scientists still aren't entirely sure how early memory formation interacts with consciousness. Some believe you need self-awareness to encode memory at all. Others argue that memory helps form that sense of self. Either way, during these toddler years, something is changing. You're not just reacting to the world. You're starting to internalize it. You're making decisions, expressing preferences, learning cause and effect. And your brain? It's still growing, but now it's specializing. The connections that are used often get stronger. The ones you don't need fade away. This selective pruning is part of why your early years feel like a blur. So much is happening, but only the useful stuff gets kept. The rest, lost, or perhaps transformed into something you carry without knowing it. So, here you are, halfway between sensation and story, standing at the threshold of memory, with one foot still in the land of unknowing. You don't remember yesterday. You don't anticipate tomorrow, but your brain is getting ready. The fog is beginning to thin. A narrative is forming, not quite yours yet, but soon. And maybe, just maybe, the reason you can't remember these years isn't because they didn't matter. Maybe it's because they mattered so much. Your brain had to grow before it could carry them. You wander forward, still in your tiny body, now toddling through the threshold of early memory. Around this time, you start to form a few hazy images that might stick. Not many, and not clearly, but they shimmer at the edges of your awareness, like shadows just outside your line of sight. A red balloon, the bark of a dog, the cool feel of grass under your feet. Are these memories, or just echoes? Even now, it's hard to say. What's changed isn't just age, it's the wiring. Deep inside your brain, your hippocampus is starting to act more like the librarian it was meant to be. It has shelves now, a filing system. It's not perfect. Things still get misfiled, misplaced, or tossed out entirely. But at least the door is open. And because of that, some moments are beginning to find a home. You're probably around age 3 now. The world still feels enormous, but you're no longer just reacting to it. You're participating, exploring, testing boundaries. You ask questions now, a lot of them. Why is the sky blue? Where do frogs go at night? Why can't I have cake for breakfast? Every answer adds a thread to the growing web of knowledge in your mind, and with each new question, you're learning to build a story around your experiences. Let's walk into your hippocampus for a moment. It's still shaped like a seahorse, small, nestled deep in the folds of your brain, but now it hums with activity. You can imagine tiny signals zipping along pathways, trying to organize the chaos of your day. Your hippocampus isn't alone in this task, though. It collaborates closely with your prefrontal cortex, which is just starting to mature. The prefrontal cortex helps make decisions, focus attention, and, crucially, distinguish real memories from imagination. But here's the catch. At this age, that last part is still very much a work in progress. You might remember a trip to the zoo and insist you saw a unicorn, or that your teddy bear spoke to you at night. And to you, that's not fiction, that's memory. Your brain doesn't yet fully separate fact from fantasy. It stores them both in the same drawer, labeled true. And this makes early memory both delightful and wildly unreliable. Still, these memories begin to shape who you think you are. You can say your own name now. You know your favorite color. You have opinions. You remember that you don't like broccoli, and that you do like spinning in circles until you fall over laughing. These aren't full scenes with start and end points, but they are the building blocks of identity. And that identity is shaped by more than just your experiences. It's also shaped by the stories other people tell you about your experiences. Your caregivers start to narrate your life, and those narrations become the scaffolding for your own memories. Remember when you wore your rain boots in the tub? You used to sing to the neighbor's cat every morning. These aren't just funny anecdotes. They're part of how you learn to recall your life. This process is called memory scaffolding, and it's one of the reasons kids who grow up in talkative households often have earlier, more detailed autobiographical memories. It's not just that they experienced more, it's that they were helped to label and rehearse what they experienced. And rehearsal, as your brain is quickly learning, is the secret to long-term memory. The more often you revisit a story, the more firmly it sticks. Scientists still debate whether memories exist without language, whether raw experience alone can be recalled without a narrative to attach to. Some say yes, pointing to sensory memory and emotional responses. Others argue that true memory, the kind that lets you tell a story, needs words. And you're right on the cusp of that transformation. Words are trickling in, and with them, memories begin to crystallize. But not all memories are created equal. Emotional intensity plays a big role. Things that scare you, surprise you, or fill you with joy are more likely to leave an impression. That's because of a little almond-shaped structure deep in your brain called the amygdala. It's your emotional alarm system, and it works closely with the hippocampus. When something feels important, the amygdala sends out a signal. Hey, remember this. So if you fell off a swing and scraped your knee, you might not remember the pain in detail, but you might remember the red of the swing seat, or the feeling of flying just before the fall, or the bandage afterward with its cartoon dinosaur. It's fragmented, yes, but it's memory. It lives somewhere in the fog, just out of reach, waiting for a cue to bring it forward. And there's another piece to this puzzle: repetition. The more often something happens, the more likely it is to leave a mark. Bedtime stories, songs in the car, the clink of a spoon in a cereal bowl. These patterns create grooves in your brain's landscape, slowly carving out memory paths. You won't remember every single bowl of cereal, but the routine of it, the comfort of it, that becomes part of you. Now step back a little. Look at this moment in development. You're forming memories, but they're fragile, malleable, easily altered. If someone shows you a photo and says, "This is your third birthday," you might begin to remember that day. Even if you don't, your brain will build a story around the image and the words. And over time, you may come to believe you've always remembered it. This is where memory starts to feel less like a camera and more like a painting. It's created, not just recorded. And like any painting, it can be touched up, repainted, even distorted. What you remember becomes a blend of fact, feeling, suggestion, and repetition. The truth lives somewhere inside, but it's wearing a few layers of imagination. So here you are, 3 years old, standing in the fog, and finally starting to see shapes. A face, a favorite toy, a rainy afternoon. These fragments won't all last, but some will. And those few may stay with you forever, not because they're important, but because they happen to get lucky. They found a shelf, they were rehearsed, they were repeated, or they simply hit you in a way that felt true. And that's how memory begins, not as a library, but as a garden, wild, untamed, a little confusing, but growing, always growing. You're growing taller now, still a child, but your steps are stronger, your voice louder, your questions more persistent. And as you move through the world with increasing confidence, something new begins to happen. You remember not just impressions or the feeling of familiarity, but full moments stitched together like short films. A birthday party with cake and candles, a scraped knee on the sidewalk, a time you hid in the closet during hide and seek and no one could find you for what felt like forever. These are your first real autobiographical memories, and they come with a strange, delightful weight. They don't arrive all at once. Of course, your memory is still selective, still fragile, still biased toward novelty, emotion, and repetition. But it's there now, turning experience into story. You're beginning to collect a mental scrapbook, even if it's patchy and uneven. And what's more, you can talk about it. Remember when I becomes a phrase you use more and more. And in saying it, you reinforce the memory. Every time you tell the story, you make the grooves a little deeper. But even now, memory isn't perfect. In fact, it's never going to be. And one of the first things you'll learn, without ever being told, is that what you feel about an event often outweighs the facts of it. A moment that frightened you might grow in your memory until it feels enormous. A kindness may become mythic in size. A disappointment might shrink over time until it becomes barely a whisper. Emotion is the editor behind the scenes, always shaping how a memory lives on. And so, we come to a curious truth. Memory is not just a record of the past. It's a reflection of how you process the world. A mirror, but a funhouse mirror, twisted, biased, wonderfully flawed. Your hippocampus may now be mature enough to encode detailed episodes, but the rest of your brain is still figuring out what to do with them. And as a child, that means your memories are deeply colored by your interpretation, your imagination, and the stories others tell. Let's not forget that your brain is still pruning. Even now, as you build memories, others are being quietly swept away. Connections that aren't reinforced are discarded, like doodles in the margins of a notebook. There's no ceremony to this. No little brain janitor tossing memories into a bin with a sigh. But the result is the same. Unless you revisit an event, mentally or verbally, it's at risk of disappearing. Scientists call this process transience, and it's one of the key characteristics of human memory. Even the clearest memory begins to fade and eventually morphs, merges, or vanishes. But at this stage, something else starts to take shape too, false memory. Because now, for the first time, your brain is skilled enough to imagine scenarios with such vividness that you might accidentally store them as real. You're 4 or 5 now, and someone asks if you remember the time you rode a giraffe at the zoo. You pause, you don't, but it sounds amazing. Maybe you do remember. Didn't it happen on your birthday? Wasn't the giraffe wearing a bow? You think harder. And the more you think, the more confident you feel. Yes, you remember. Except you don't. It never happened. But your brain doesn't mind. It's trying to be helpful. It's trying to create coherence. So, it fills in the gaps with possibility, with suggestion, with imagination. It's not lying, it's storytelling. And once the story is rehearsed a few times, it's embedded. It feels as real as anything else. This is not a flaw, it's a feature. Memory is designed to serve understanding, not just accuracy. It's a tool for constructing identity, not a courtroom transcript. And your young brain is beginning to use that tool in earnest, hammering and chiseling a sense of self from the marble block of experience. You remember that you're shy, or bold, or funny, or fast. You remember what makes you proud, what made you cry, what earned you praise. These aren't just events, they're definitions. And while your memory continues to mature, so does your understanding of time. You can now talk about yesterday and tomorrow with relative confidence. You understand seasons, birthdays, school years. Time stretches out ahead of you like a road, and your memories become the footprints behind you. For the first time, you're aware of being in time, of having a past, and maybe even a future. But not all memories are friendly. At this age, you might also begin to carry fears more consciously. A loud noise, a lost toy, a moment when a parent seemed angry or far away. Your emotional brain is on high alert, and while many experiences slide away, the ones that hit hardest tend to dig in deep. This is why childhood memories can have such power. They're formative, not just for what they contain, but for how they felt. Your amygdala is partly to thank for this. It's still working closely with your hippocampus, flagging the emotionally charged moments for special treatment. A scare, even a small one, may become etched into your brain with surprising permanence. And sometimes, this happens without you remembering the actual event. You just carry the feeling without the why, and that can be confusing. Imagine feeling uneasy every time you see a certain playground slide, even though you don't remember falling off it when you were little, or being afraid of a particular dog breed, without recalling the time one barked in your face. These are called implicit memories, stored without conscious recall, but strong enough to steer your behavior. At the same time, you're learning to manage memory more deliberately. You keep treasures, drawings, rocks, birthday cards. You might hide things and come back for them later, testing your recall like a miniature scientist. You begin to enjoy stories, not just hearing them, but telling them. And in those retellings, you practice memory, polish it, and give it form. By now, your sense of self is solidifying. You know who you are, what you like, where you've been. Your memories feel like yours, unique, even if they're flawed. And maybe that's the most human part of all. We're not machines. We don't store perfect files. We collect moments that shimmer, bend, and fade, and we call that a life. So you walk forward, a little older, a little more certain, carrying your tiny bundle of moments. They're not many, but they're yours. The first chapters of a book only you can write, with a pencil that sometimes smudges. You're waking up to yourself now, fully aware of being a person who has a name, a home, a favorite blanket, and perhaps most importantly, a past. That awareness starts to stretch out behind you like a path, not just paved with flashes and fragments, but lined with episodes, stories, beginnings and middles, and sometimes even ends. You can point backward and say, "That happened to me." You're not just experiencing life anymore, you're remembering it. But that doesn't mean everything sticks. Far from it. The vast majority of your days still vanish. You might think back to being 5 or 6 years old and only recall a dozen moments. A classroom with colorful posters, a game of tag that left your knees scraped, a time you cried during a thunderstorm. Everything else, the ordinary days, the routine tasks, the in-between hours, they dissolve into the ether. Not because they weren't real or even important, but because your brain is still curating, and it's picky. The process of remembering is selective by design. Your brain doesn't want to hoard every second. It wants to extract meaning. It looks for things that matter emotionally, socially, or in terms of learning. If a moment doesn't meet one of those criteria, it's quietly set aside. You experienced it, sure, but the door closed behind it before it could leave a trace. At this age, repetition is still key. Events that recur start to take shape as a kind of low-humming background memory. Getting dropped off at school, sitting at the kitchen table, hearing a familiar bedtime story for the 50th time. You won't remember every occurrence, but you'll remember the pattern, the overall feeling of routine, of rhythm, of what life felt like during this time, and your memory is beginning to work not just for recall, but for anticipation. You remember that last time you wore your raincoat, it rained. So now, when the clouds gather, you expect it. You remember that Grandma brings cookies, that Dad sings the off-key lullaby. You predict based on memory. And this is the beginning of planning, of strategy, of imagining not just what was, but what might be. You also start to understand perspective, not just physically, but mentally, that others can remember things you don't, that their version of a shared event might differ. This is a huge leap. You're stepping outside your own view, and memory becomes more than a private reel of images. It becomes something to compare, to discuss, to negotiate. "That's not what happened," becomes a battle cry on the playground. Of course, some of your strongest memories are still anchored in emotion. A moment of embarrassment in front of your classmates. A warm hug after you got hurt. These events get tagged by your amygdala, reinforced in your hippocampus, and stored with extra glue. Even now, you might still feel a strange ache when you remember a childhood moment of rejection, or an unexpected jolt of joy when you think of someone who made you laugh. But now, there's something else layering into your memory. Self-consciousness. You're beginning to see yourself through the eyes of others. Not only do you remember events, but you start to remember how you felt about yourself during those events. You remember being proud, or ashamed, or shy. These reflections become seeds of identity, and they don't always tell the truth, but they feel true, and that's enough for them to stick. This is the age where memories start to gain narrative shape. You no longer remember just a picture or a feeling. Now you remember what happened, in what order, and often why. You begin to tell your own stories, and in doing so, you practice memory out loud. You rehearse, embellish, forget, revise. It's performance and processing, all at once. And yet, for all this growth, your brain still loses more than it keeps. Even as you rehearse some events into permanence, others vanish, often without warning. You may never know why a certain birthday party is burned into your brain, but the following years is a total blank. Sometimes memory is a spotlight. Other times, it's a fog machine. Still, there's one thing that keeps sharpening memory at this age: language. Your vocabulary is expanding rapidly. You now have names for emotions, for thoughts, for experiences that once passed through you without a label. And with names come boundaries. You're able to distinguish between angry and frustrated, between nervous and excited. Each word is a hook that gives your memory something to hang on to. And as your language deepens, your memory becomes richer, more layered. You can recall not just what happened, but what you said, what someone else said, what you thought about it afterward. You're narrating your own life now, moment by moment, even if you don't always say it out loud. This inner narration strengthens memory in ways scientists are still unraveling. One theory suggests that remembering is largely the same process as imagining. Both use similar parts of the brain. So, each time you recall a moment, you're partially recreating it. But this also means you're changing it. Each time you remember, you edit. You might insert details that weren't there. You might delete ones that were. You're not trying to lie. You're trying to understand. And your brain, helpful as always, smooths the rough edges to make the story make sense. You may now start to remember events from when you were 3 or 4, but rarely anything earlier. That border, that line in the sand between memory and non-memory, still stands. Infantile amnesia lingers, mysterious and firm. Scientists still debate whether those early memories are truly gone or simply inaccessible. One theory is that the encoding system, your hippocampus and surrounding structures, just wasn't mature enough. Another theory is that, without language or a clear sense of self, there was no stable framework to begin with, no scaffolding, no you to attach the memory to. So, here you are, 7 or 8 years old, standing in a brain that's far more organized than the one you were born with. You have mental shelves now, full of little boxes and folders, some labeled clearly, others smudged, a few locked shut, waiting for just the right cue. a smell, a sound, a photograph to unlock them. You don't know it, but your memory is about to change again. Puberty is around the corner, and with it comes another wave of neural reshuffling. But for now, you're in a golden moment, old enough to remember clearly, young enough not to question too much. You hold your memories like seashells collected on a beach, bright, delicate, incomplete, but entirely your own. And you begin to sense something bigger, that these fragments of the past are not just echoes. They are the early pages of the story you're writing, a story with a voice, a point of view, and a heartbeat that's learning how to beat forward and backward. Now you're 9, maybe 10. The world feels a little smaller than it did when you were 5. But that's only because your mind is stretching further. You no longer live moment to moment. You live in stories, and not just bedtime tales or books from school, but your own unfolding narrative. You remember the time you won the spelling bee, or the day you accidentally let the neighbor's cat inside. You remember the camping trip, the thunderstorm, the first time you realized your friend could lie. These aren't fragments anymore. They're scenes. You're becoming a collector of moments, whether you realize it or not. Not everything makes it into the vault, of course, but more sticks than before. You're now fully capable of forming episodic memories, full memories of events tied to specific times and places, organized like chapters. You can recall what happened, where it happened, who was there, and how you felt. You can even say what came before and after. But even now, you forget most of what happens to you. Scientists estimate that people forget over 90% of their daily experiences. That's not a glitch. It's efficiency. Your brain is trying to store a highlight reel, not raw footage. If you remembered every blink, every cough, every hallway you ever walked down, it would be impossible to function. Forgetting isn't failure, it's a feature, one that helps you focus on what matters. Still, some memories resist fading. Emotion is one reason, novelty is another. The first time you perform in a school play, the day you break a bone, the time your best friend moves away. These experiences stand out because they break the pattern. And memory loves patterns, but it remembers the breaks. This is also the age where nostalgia begins to quietly enter your life. You start to remember remembering. You look back on your earlier childhood, and something about it feels warm, distant, maybe even a little golden. You can't explain why, but you feel it, that ache of sweetness, that odd twinge when you see a toy you used to love, that quiet flicker when you hear a song from when you were little. Your brain is beginning to wrap your early years in velvet. At the same time, your memory is beginning to serve a different function. It's starting to shape your expectations of who you are. If you remember succeeding at something, you're more likely to believe you're good at it. If you remember failing, you might carry that story forward. You're not just remembering what happened, you're building a belief system, and beliefs are sticky. This is where schema becomes crucial. Mental templates that help you organize the world. You create a school schema, a friendship schema, even a self-schema. These are built partly from experience, partly from memory, and once they're in place, they influence how you store new memories. If your schema says, "I'm not athletic," you may downplay or even forget moments when you were good at sports. Your memory becomes filtered, curated by the identity you're assembling. And yet, you're still flexible, still changing, still growing. Your prefrontal cortex is lighting up more and more, helping you with impulse control, long-term planning, and critical thinking. And that has a big impact on memory. You're now better able to reflect, to think about thinking, to wonder not just what happened, but why it happened. You're no longer just replaying events, you're analyzing them. But even with all this sophistication, you're not immune to distortion. In fact, now that your memory is more developed, it's also more vulnerable because it's more narrative driven. If someone tells you a story about something you did, and they tell it often enough, you'll start to remember it that way. Even if they've exaggerated, even if they're a little wrong, your brain, ever eager to make sense of things, updates the file. This means memory is both fragile and robust. You may be able to recall the color of the walls in your childhood bedroom, or the sound your bike made when the chain slipped. But you might completely forget the name of your second grade teacher, or the time you got lost at the grocery store. Memory doesn't care much about fairness. It cares about emotion, about meaning, about structure. Let's also talk about the role of rehearsal, and not just casual remembering, but deliberate storytelling. At this age, you're learning to tell your own stories. Not just, this happened, but this is who I am because it happened. These stories get refined, repeated, internalized. They become the way you explain yourself to others and to yourself. And over time, they can become more real than the events they're based on. That's the strange beauty of memory. It's alive. It changes every time you touch it. The act of remembering is a creative act, not just retrieval, but recreation. Your brain is doing its best to be accurate, but it's also trying to be helpful, to create coherence, to preserve self-esteem, to connect the dots. And in that effort, it's not afraid to smooth out wrinkles or fill in gaps. You're also beginning to understand the idea of shared memory. You and a friend might remember the same event differently. You might argue about who said what. You might laugh about how fuzzy the details have become. And that, too, is memory doing its job, prioritizing emotional truth over factual precision. It doesn't have to be perfect to be yours. Sometimes, a smell brings something back you didn't know you lost. The scent of sunscreen, the smell of chalk, a whiff of your childhood shampoo. These triggers bypass your thinking brain and go straight to your limbic system, the part of you that remembers without words. That feeling of being 7 again, for no clear reason, that's the olfactory system pulling a memory out of deep storage. And sometimes, you try to remember something and can't. You close your eyes, reach for it, almost feel it, but it slips away. That's called a retrieval failure, and it's maddening, but it's also normal. The memory might still be in there, somewhere, or it might be gone for good. There's no way to know for sure. Memory doesn't come with tracking numbers. So here you are, not quite a teenager, no longer a little kid. Your brain has built a library, and while some of the shelves are sparse, others are full. You've begun to curate your own history. Some entries are detailed, others are blurry, a few have been rewritten, and that's okay. Because memory isn't just what happened, it's how you understand what happened. It's the story of you, as told by your brain, lovingly, imperfectly, and always in progress. And even though you can't reach back to those earliest years, even though the first chapters are missing or scattered or gone, you carry them in your reactions, in your preferences, in the quiet ways your body responds to comfort or stress or love. You remember, even when you don't. You cross a quiet line without knowing it, the beginning of adolescence. Your limbs feel longer, your thoughts feel heavier, and inside your brain, a renovation project begins in earnest. The wiring you've been building since birth, it's being upgraded. Some connections are reinforced, others removed. New roots form. Your brain is adapting not just to the world, but to the version of you you're becoming. This internal reshuffling comes with changes in how you remember. Memories take on new weight, new complexity. You no longer just recall events. You remember them in context. A glance from a friend might mean betrayal. A compliment might stay with you for weeks. You begin to encode not only what happened, but what it meant to you. And meaning is memory's favorite companion. Your hippocampus is still hard at work, but now the prefrontal cortex, the seat of higher order thinking, plays a bigger role. You can reflect, analyze, reframe. You're not just a character in your story anymore. You're the narrator. And with that power comes a new relationship to your past. You can revisit it, reinterpret it, even question it. Was I really so bad at math? Did they really mean it that way? Memory becomes more flexible and, at times, more unreliable. You also begin to understand how memory is influenced by emotion, not just in the moment, but over time. An event that once felt small can grow larger in retrospect. A comment you shrugged off then might sting now under a different light. You start to curate your personal history, not just as a series of events, but as a narrative with emotional through lines. You find themes, patterns, maybe even plot twists. And then there's the body. Puberty doesn't just change how you feel, it changes how you remember. Hormonal shifts impact brain chemistry, especially in areas involved in emotion and memory. The result? Intense memories, vivid dreams, emotional flashbacks. This is why adolescence is often remembered so sharply. The volume is turned up. Experiences are saturated. Your brain is paying attention, sometimes whether you want it to or not. You might remember your first crush with aching detail, or a moment of public embarrassment that still makes your stomach drop. You might forget entire weeks of school, but remember exactly how it felt when someone laughed at your idea. Emotionally charged events don't just last, they echo. And sometimes, they shape how you view yourself for years to come. Scientists believe this period may form a kind of memory bump, a time when experiences are more likely to be remembered in adulthood. If you ask an older person to list their most vivid memories, a surprising number often come from ages 10 to 25. Why? No one knows for sure. Some suggest it's because this era is filled with firsts. First kiss, first real failure, first time driving. Others think it's because you're actively forming identity, and memory follows identity like a loyal pet. But adolescence isn't just about drama, it's also about reflection. You begin to ask deeper questions. Why do I feel this way? Who am I becoming? What do I believe? And these internal questions shape what you remember. You might not recall your science fair project in detail, but you will remember how it felt to be praised or ignored for it. You're editing for story, for self, for meaning. And yes, distortion still happens. Maybe even more than before. Because now you want the story to make sense. You might unconsciously enhance memories that support your self-image, or downplay those that don't. If you see yourself as brave, you may amplify moments of courage. If you think of yourself as awkward, you may over-remember stumbles and silences. Your brain is creating a personal mythology, and it doesn't always fact-check. memory becomes social too. You talk with friends, reminisce, share perspectives. And in that sharing, your own memory shifts. If someone tells you that you were the funniest person in class, you might start remembering yourself that way, even if you weren't. Or maybe you were, but had never seen it until someone said it aloud. Memory is contagious. It spreads through story, laughter, agreement. And then there's technology. For the first time, you might begin to outsource memory. Text messages, photos, social media posts. They create an external archive of your life. A birthday party you would have forgotten is now tagged, filtered, and stored. A moment you didn't even notice becomes a memory because someone took a photo. This is a shift no previous generation experienced in the same way. Memory, once private and internal, becomes shared, curated, liked. But that doesn't mean your organic memory shuts down. Far from it. You're just navigating a new dynamic, the difference between what you experienced and what you captured, and sometimes the capture becomes the memory. You don't remember the concert. You remember the video of it. You don't recall how the cake tasted. You remember the picture of it on your birthday feed. Memory bends again, shaped not just by neurons, but by pixels. And still, you forget your locker combination, a teacher's name, what you wore to school 3 days ago, because your brain is still prioritizing, still sorting, still letting go of what doesn't serve your evolving self. You're learning that remembering everything isn't possible or even desirable. Selective memory is how we survive the flood of experience. At this stage, you might also begin to revisit your earliest memories with a new lens. Maybe that hazy image of a tree in your grandmother's yard means more now. Maybe a vague memory of fear in a hospital room begins to make sense as you learn more. The past is no longer static. It's revisitable, rewritable, and as your understanding grows, so does the depth of your memory. What once seemed like a random image might now feel like a clue, a breadcrumb, a whisper from a younger you. You might also start to wonder about the memories you don't have, why you can't remember being a baby, why certain parts of childhood are blank, why something that seemed so important at the time is now lost. This curiosity is natural, and it opens the door to empathy, too. You realize that everyone else is carrying their own patchwork of remembered and forgotten moments. Everyone else is doing their best to build a story out of scattered pages. And so, you walk forward. A teenager now, carrying a past that is fuller, richer, more emotionally textured than ever before. You've said goodbye to the fog of infancy. You've stepped into a mind that can reflect, revise, and even forgive. And while you still can't reach all the way back to your earliest days, those soft, warm, silent beginnings, you begin to understand that they're not lost. They're part of the architecture, the quiet foundation beneath everything that's come since. You don't remember being born. You don't remember learning to walk, but you are here, standing tall on a path paved by things your brain forgot and things your body remembered. You stand at the edge of your teenage years, peering back through the cluttered hallway of your memory. Some doors are open wide, revealing vivid scenes, your first school dance, a vacation that went sideways, a secret whispered under a blanket. Others are barely cracked, offering only a flicker of sound or color before they fade. And still others are sealed tight, with no hint of what might lie behind them. These are your early years, the years everyone talks about, but no one can fully reach. But something interesting is beginning to happen. You're realizing that memory is not just personal, it's cultural. What you remember and how you remember it is shaped not only by your brain, but by the world around you, the stories your family repeats, the way your community marks milestones, even the language you speak. All of these influence what sticks in your mind and what doesn't. Culture acts like a filter, highlighting some events while letting others pass by unnoticed. It doesn't change the past, but it changes what becomes part of your story. For example, in some cultures, early independence is encouraged. Children are celebrated for doing things on their own, and their earliest memories often reflect that. I remember tying my shoes. I remember walking to the store alone. In other cultures, relationships are the focus. And so, the first memories might be, I remember my aunt feeding me, or I remember sleeping between my parents. Same age, same human brain, but different emphasis, different narrative. Even the way you're taught to talk about the past can shape how much of it you retain. Children who are encouraged to describe their experiences in detail tend to have earlier and more vivid autobiographical memories. Meanwhile, kids who are raised in environments where the past isn't discussed as much might have fewer early recollections, not because their brains are less capable, but because they weren't trained to retrieve and rehearse. And then there's the role of collective memory, the memories you share with your group, your family, your nation. These are the moments that become anchors, passed down through stories, photos, holidays, and rituals. You might not remember the day your sibling was born, but you remember being told about it every year. You might not recall the moment you moved to a new home, but your parents' version of that day plays in your head like your own memory. It's in this way that memory is built not just from within, but from without. You begin to see that your mind doesn't keep perfect records. It builds a working version of the past, using scraps of your own recall and the scaffolding of shared narratives. This can be comforting. It means you're not the sole keeper of your life's story. Others help hold the pieces for you, but it can also be confusing. Sometimes people remember the same event differently. You might remember being the hero of a childhood moment, only to hear someone else recall it with laughter, or even disapproval. You might swear you were wearing a red jacket when it happened, but your cousin insists it was blue. These aren't lies. They're just the natural drift of memory, tugged by time, emotion, and perspective. Scientists still debate why memory is so susceptible to this kind of distortion. One theory suggests that each time you recall something, you're not pulling up the original memory, you're pulling up the last version you remembered. And with each retelling, each internal replay, the memory gets a little more polished, or a little more warped, like making a copy of a copy of a copy. Eventually, it's hard to say what was real, but even with all these variables, even with all the influence of culture, family, language, and personal bias, your memories still feel yours. They carry weight. They feel real. And maybe that's because they don't just tell you what happened. They tell you who you are. You begin to notice patterns in what you remember. Maybe you remember challenges more vividly than triumphs. Or maybe you're the opposite. Maybe your early memories are full of motion, running, climbing, falling. Or maybe they're filled with faces, voices, moments of stillness. Whatever the theme, these memories start to form a kind of emotional fingerprint, a mood, a tone, a perspective that echoes across your life. And here's where things get even more interesting. The stories you carry start to influence the ones you choose to create. If your early memories make you feel brave, You might seek out new challenges. If they make you feel like an outsider, you might become more observant, more reflective. Memory becomes a guide, not just to where you've been, but to where you might go next. Now, think about the stories you tell others, the anecdotes you repeat, the moments you bring up in conversation, the way you explain your childhood in a few short sentences. These aren't just summaries, they're selective acts of memory. Each time you choose which stories to tell, you're reinforcing their importance and letting others quietly fade away. You're sculpting your narrative, trimming and shaping it, whether you realize it or not. This sculpting becomes especially clear when you compare your memories to those of people from other backgrounds. Maybe you meet someone whose childhood was filled with rituals and ceremonies, while yours was more spontaneous. Maybe someone else remembers being pushed to achieve, while you remember being left to explore. The differences aren't just in experience, they're in the kinds of memories that rise to the surface. And yet, there are also astonishing similarities. Across cultures and continents, children tend to forget their first years. The border of memory seems to fall somewhere between 2 and 4 years old, almost universally, no matter what language they speak, no matter what customs they follow. Human beings all pass through this same forgetful doorway. We all begin with silence, with softness, with mist, and we all slowly step into memory, one fragile moment at a time. That shared amnesia is a kind of strange comfort. It connects you to every person who's ever lived. No one remembers their beginning. Not really. We rely on others to tell us who we were. And then we carry those borrowed beginnings into the rest of our lives, believing in them until they feel real. So, you keep walking, a little older, a little wiser. You carry stories now, not just your own, but the ones others gave you. You've begun to understand that memory is a blend of brain and culture, of emotion and rehearsal, of private feeling and public narrative. And you've started to see how powerful it is, not just in shaping what you recall, but in guiding who you become. And though you still can't reach back to those earliest moments, you've learned something vital. That memory is not a fixed record. It's a living thing. It grows, it changes, and it can be tended, like a garden. You can't remember your first words, but you can choose the next ones. You're well into adolescence now, standing on firmer ground, with a growing sense of who you are and where you've been. Your mind feels sharper, more deliberate. You start to look at memory less as a passive reflection and more as something you can use. You draw on it for decisions, for identity, for comfort, and sometimes for caution. And more than ever before, you begin to realize that memory is selective, not just in what it keeps, but in how it shapes the version of you present to the world. This is when you begin crafting your personal narrative, whether you're aware of it or not. You start connecting dots across time. I've always been this way, you say, or that's just who I am. But what you're really doing is arranging memories into a line that feels consistent. You're creating the illusion of continuity, that your younger self and your current self are part of the same unfolding story. And in a way, they are. But only partly. The truth is, you're always editing. There are versions of you, from age 3, age 8, age 12, that no longer quite fit, so your brain files them away, or rewrites them just a little. The tantrums you once threw, now they're funny. That awkward phase, now it's endearing. You rewrite history not to deceive, but to integrate. You're learning how to carry your past without letting it overwhelm you. At this point in your life, you might begin to question certain memories. Were they accurate? Were they exaggerated? Were they even yours to begin with? Maybe a sibling has a different version of an event you both experienced. Maybe your parents insist something happened differently. And suddenly, memory becomes more like a group project and less like a private archive. This raises a strange and fascinating question. Can a memory be yours if you didn't actually form it? If you've been told a story about your childhood so many times that you see it in your mind, even though you never truly remembered it, does that count? The science says maybe. Your brain doesn't always distinguish between something you lived and something you believe you lived. If the image is vivid, the emotion strong, and the story coherent, it becomes part of your memory landscape. This is especially true for those earliest years, the ones lost to infantile amnesia. As a teenager, you might still be told stories from that time, how you refused to wear socks, how you called all animals woof, how you once ran away with the TV remote and buried it in the garden. You don't remember any of it, but the stories are so clear, so rehearsed, that they begin to feel like memories. You can picture them. You can laugh about them. And so, in a way, they become yours. That's the beauty and the strangeness of reconstructed memory. It reminds you that remembering isn't just about what happened. It's about how it was explained to you, framed, delivered, shared. You inherit memory from those around you, the way you inherit traditions or recipes or lullabies, and that inheritance becomes part of your inner world. Now, as your brain matures, you're also gaining more control over how you remember. You can choose to revisit certain moments and not others. You can reshape old stories through a new lens. You can reframe a moment of shame into a lesson, or a moment of pain into strength. This isn't about pretending. It's about evolving. Memory doesn't stay fixed while you grow. It changes with you. Your sense of time deepens too. You begin to feel the weight of years, not just yesterday and last summer, but years ago. Times that now feel distant, wrapped in soft edges and music you don't listen to anymore. You might stumble across an old journal entry or a photo and feel both close to and entirely alien from the person you were. And yet, that memory lives inside you, whether it fits the current version of you or not. This is the paradox of memory in adolescence. You are becoming more you than ever before, but your memories are also starting to slip into a kind of nostalgia. They're still close, but they're already colored by perspective. The way you remember being 10 now is different from how you remembered it when you were 11. And in a few years, it'll change again. Memory is not a timeline. It's more like a map, always being redrawn as your view of the terrain changes. Some paths grow clearer with time, others fade. Some roads you thought were straight turn out to curve. And sometimes, you discover whole neighborhoods you forgot existed. Scientists call this reconsolidation. Every time you access a memory, you don't just retrieve it, you rewrite it. You store a new version. This means your memories are dynamic, not static, alive. They evolve as you do, and that makes them more human than any photograph or recording could ever be. At this stage, you might also begin to reflect on the emotional weight of memory, not just what happened, but how it shaped you. You might recognize patterns in your reactions, why certain comments still sting, why certain places make you feel safe. You might begin to explore therapy, journaling, meditation, all ways to engage with memory intentionally. And in doing so, you become not just the narrator, but the editor of your story. And still, the early years remain distant. You try to reach back to the beginning, but it's like reaching through fog. You know things happened. You've seen the photos, heard the stories, but they live outside your reach. And yet, somehow, they still inform everything. The way you trust, the way you love, the way you respond to stress or kindness or silence. This is the lingering power of your unremembered past. It may not speak in words or images, but it echoes through your behavior. It shaped your foundation, and while you may never access it directly, you carry it in your nervous system, in your instincts, in your emotional reflexes. By now, you've probably stopped trying to remember your first steps, your first words, your first day on Earth. You accept that those memories belong to a version of you you'll never quite meet. But every day since then, every story, every laugh, every lesson has layered onto that blank beginning like paint on a canvas. You don't need the first stroke to appreciate the masterpiece that's forming. And maybe that's what matters most. Not the precise content of your earliest memories, but the way they made room for everything else. The fact that you don't remember doesn't mean they didn't matter. It means they mattered so much your brain needed to grow up before it could even begin to hold them. So now, as you move into adulthood, you carry your memory not as a perfect archive, but as a living portrait, flawed, shifting, deeply yours. Some memories stay bright, others dim, some are inherited, some are imagined, but together, they shape the story only you can tell. You wake up one morning and realize you've crossed another invisible threshold. You're an adult now, legally, maybe practically, maybe just emotionally. Whatever the measure, the world expects you to remember things. Appointments, deadlines, passwords, where you parked. You don't just use memory for identity anymore. You use it to function, to manage, to stay afloat. And with that shift, memory starts to feel less like a story and more like a tool. But the story is still there, humming quietly in the background. You carry it into job interviews, first dates, friendships, even solitude. You use it to explain yourself, why you like the quiet, why you always double-check the locks, why you find comfort in certain smells. You may not always speak these stories aloud, but they inform your every interaction. They are the map you consult as you navigate a world that assumes you know where you've been. By now, your brain's memory systems are fully mature. Your hippocampus has long since finished developing. Your prefrontal cortex is sharp, logical, organized. You've become better at filtering. You remember what you need to remember, or at least, you try. There are grocery lists and alarm clocks and reminders set on every device you own. Your brain has learned to delegate, but deep down, you still rely on the old system, the internal one, the one that captures experience and gives it meaning. You might notice that your memories begin to stabilize now. You're less likely to reshape your past with each new retelling. There's more consistency. And yet, that consistency is built on layers of previous edits. What you now believe to be the truth may be 5 versions removed from the original event. That's not deception. That's just how memory works, reconstructed, refiled, reconsolidated. But even as your memory matures, it reveals its quirks. You forget why you walked into a room. You forget people's names 2 seconds after meeting them. You remember obscure jingles from the 90s, but forget where you put your phone. You forget birthdays, even your own sometimes. These lapses can feel frustrating, even a little alarming, but they're normal. Your memory isn't failing, it's prioritizing, filtering, trying to distinguish signal from noise. You start to recognize just how context-dependent memory really is. You can remember something instantly when you smell a certain shampoo or walk past a place you haven't seen in years. But try to recall it on demand, and nothing comes. This is known as contextual retrieval. Your brain tags memories with environmental cues, and without the right ones, access becomes a lot harder. It's like having the right book, but the wrong library card. This is why certain memories feel lost, only to return with shocking clarity when you least expect it. A certain light at dusk, the chime of a particular bell, a voice with just the right rhythm. And suddenly, you're 12 again, or 5, or 17, not remembering in the abstract, but reliving. These aren't just thoughts, they're immersive, and they remind you that memory is not bound by time. It can leap backward, instantly, without warning. You also start to notice how much of your memory is shared. In adulthood, you build relationships not just by sharing experiences, but by sharing how you remember them. You recall a trip differently than your friend does. You argue over the details or laugh at the contradictions. These aren't just casual disagreements, they're collisions of perspective. Memory is personal, but it's also social. How we remember things together affects how close we feel, how much we trust, how well we connect. And then there's forgetting, the quiet sibling of memory. You begin to understand that forgetting isn't the opposite of remembering. It's part of the same process. Your brain lets go so it can hold on to what matters. If you remembered every sandwich you ever ate, every walk you ever took, your mind would be cluttered with noise. Forgetting is a kind of mercy. It allows you to live in the present without being crushed by the past. That said, some things shouldn't be forgotten, and yet they slip away. You find yourself struggling to remember details from college, or names of coworkers from old jobs, or the street you lived on in that one city for 2 whole years. You were there, you lived it, but now it's gone. Scientists still debate what causes this kind of long-term fading. Some say it's because the memories were never fully encoded. Others believe they were encoded, but haven't been retrieved enough to stay strong. You're also learning that memory isn't always about facts. Sometimes, it's about feeling. You might forget the specifics of a vacation, but remember how relaxed you felt. You might forget the conversation, but remember the way someone made you feel heard. These emotional contours become the shape of memory when the details have washed away, and they're often the parts that matter most. At this stage, many people begin to intentionally revisit the past. You look through old journals, photo albums, saved voicemails, not just for nostalgia, but to understand, to trace a thread through your life, to find proof that you've grown, that you've survived, that you've changed. And often, you discover that the person you were still lives inside you, not as a stranger, but as a version of you that helped build the one who stands here now. And sometimes, as you revisit those fragments, something unexpected happens. An old memory reemerges, clearer than ever. Maybe it's the sound of your mother's laugh at the dinner table, or the way your childhood bedroom smelled on a rainy day, or the first time you realized the stars were impossibly far away. These aren't just recollections, They're tiny doors that open into entire rooms you thought were lost. You might also begin to wonder, which memories will stay with me forever? Which ones will vanish? No matter how tightly I try to hold them, there's no way to know for sure. But you start to get a sense that it's not just what happened that matters, but what you noticed, what you felt, what you chose to carry. Some moments seem insignificant until years later, when they rise up and show you their quiet importance. You still can't reach the first years. The amnesia holds. Those earliest months, even years, remain out of reach. But they don't feel so foreign anymore. You see now how much of your current self was shaped in that foggy time. The way you seek safety, the way you react to loss, the comfort you feel in certain places for reasons you can't name. These are the fingerprints of memories you never had. So you keep going, a little older, maybe a little wiser. You still forget where you left your keys. Still remember the theme song from a cartoon you haven't seen in decades. Still catch your breath when a scent from childhood brushes past you in a crowd. Your memory isn't perfect, but it's yours. A living, breathing story, still being written with each passing day. And though the first chapters may be missing, the story is full of meaning. And the fact that you're here, remembering any of it at all, that's a kind of miracle in itself. You find yourself thinking more often now about how memory changes with time, not just your own, but everyone's. You begin to see that aging isn't just about the body, it's about how the mind begins to hold and release the past. You meet people who can tell you vivid stories from 50 years ago, and others who can't remember what they had for breakfast. You notice how certain memories sharpen, while others fade into fog, and you realize something profound. Memory ages too. As your adult life continues, you begin to feel the weight of accumulated experience. Your memory becomes less about novelty and more about resonance. Events from the past start to echo forward. You may be walking down the street when suddenly you're reminded of a conversation you had 10 years ago, or you hear a song you haven't thought about in decades, and the memory comes not as an image but as a full-body feeling. Your memories begin to visit you, uninvited and deeply familiar. You start to understand the concept of semantic memory, the kind of memory that stores facts, meanings, and general knowledge. This part of your memory becomes more stable as you age. You remember what a stapler is, or how to boil pasta, or who the first president was. You might not recall when you learned it, or who taught it to you, but the knowledge stays. It becomes the scaffolding you lean on daily. But episodic memory, the recall of specific events, can be trickier, especially as time passes. The details soften. You might forget the exact date or who was in the room. You might mix up 2 birthdays or blur one vacation into another. And yet, the emotional core often remains. You don't remember every word someone said, but you remember the way their voice trembled. You don't remember what you wore, but you remember the cold of that morning air. Your memory starts to prioritize emotion over precision. This shift isn't just biological, it's practical. Your brain adapts. It holds on to what matters most for meaning and lets go of what no longer serves. In a way, it's an act of kindness. The small details, the ones that once felt important, are traded in for clarity of feeling, of lesson, of truth. And over time, those become the markers of your life. Not every birthday party, just the one where you felt truly seen. Not every argument, just the one that changed something. At this stage, you might also start to notice how often you repeat stories. You catch yourself telling the same memory twice, or forgetting whether you already shared it with someone. This isn't just about forgetfulness, it's about significance. The stories you repeat are often the ones you're still processing, or the ones that define how you want to be remembered. Each retelling becomes a little more polished, a little more you. Scientists call this narrative rehearsal, and it plays a huge role in which memories persist. The more you tell a story, the more neural connections are reinforced. It becomes easier to retrieve, more familiar. But here's the twist. Every time you retrieve it, you also have the chance to change it, to frame it differently, add something, leave something out. So even your most well-worn memories evolve. They don't stay fixed. They follow you. And yet, there are still memories that come back suddenly, without rehearsal. You might be peeling an orange and remember your grandfather showing you how to twist the peel into one long spiral. You didn't know you still had that moment stored away, but there it is, vivid and intact, and somehow it feels like a gift, like your brain has been quietly keeping things for you, waiting until the moment was right to bring them forward. As your life accumulates, your perspective on memory shifts. You realize that what you forget can be just as meaningful as what you remember, that there is peace in not clinging to every detail, that letting go is not the same as losing, and that sometimes the best parts of life aren't the ones you remember clearly, but the ones that change you quietly. You may also begin to reflect on your earliest years with a new kind of curiosity, not just to understand your development, but to understand your parents, your caregivers, the people who shaped your beginnings. You start to ask different questions. What were they feeling when they held you as a baby? What did they remember? What parts of your childhood are only preserved in their minds, their photos, their stories? And maybe some of those stories have faded too. Maybe the people who once told you about your first steps can no longer recall them. Or maybe they're gone, and the stories left with them. You feel a tenderness then, a recognition that memory is communal, and that some parts of your story now exist only in echo. But also a kind of gratitude that they once held those pieces for you, even if you never truly got to see them. You might even look at younger people now, your own children, maybe, or nieces and nephews, and wonder what they'll remember, what will stay, what will quietly disappear, and how can you help them carry the pieces that matter without burdening them with every detail. You start to understand memory as something we pass along, not perfectly, but lovingly, a handoff from one mind to another, always incomplete, but always meaningful. And this is where memory begins to feel sacred, not in a religious sense necessarily, but in a human one. The idea that we can carry the past within us, that we can hold on to a smile, a scent, a single sentence someone once said, and that it can comfort us years later. Memory becomes less about accuracy and more about presence. It becomes a way of holding close what time tries to scatter. You may not remember every place you've been, or every person you've met, or every thought you've had, but you remember enough to know who you are, enough to know what shaped you, enough to stand in the present with a sense of continuity, even if the beginning is lost to the mist. And that beginning, it still matters, even if you can't recall it, even if it's gone forever from conscious reach, because it was there, it happened, it built the scaffolding your life has risen from. Your very ability to not remember it, that infantile amnesia, is what made space for all the memories that followed. You never remembered your first breath, but it led to every moment of wonder that came after. And now, in the quieter hours of your adult life, you start to think about memory not only as a personal archive, but as a conversation between who you were, who you are, and who you might become. You begin to see how every memory, even the faintest ones, contributes to the invisible scaffolding that holds you upright. Some are strong and clear, like beams of steel. Others are wisps, faded images, fragments of emotion, a look, a gesture, the way someone said your name. But all of them, together, form the outline of your being. This is when you start noticing how memory weaves into the present in unexpected ways. A piece of music plays, and suddenly you're overcome with emotion. You can't place why. It doesn't link to a specific event, but your body knows. Somewhere inside, that sound reached a memory too quiet to speak, too deep to surface. You realize that memory isn't always something you retrieve. Sometimes, it's something that moves through you. You begin to carry people within you, too, not just as photos or stories, but as memory traces, a parent's hands, a friend's laugh, the advice your teacher gave you once that didn't make sense until now. These people might still be with you, or they might be gone. But in your memory, they are alive, static in some ways, eternal in others. Memory allows you to revisit them, not perfectly, but sincerely. You start noticing how your own memories help others. You tell stories to a younger sibling, or to your child, or to a friend who's struggling. You share a moment from your life, maybe small, maybe embarrassing, and suddenly they feel less alone. Your memory becomes a bridge, something to walk across together. And in telling it, you realize the story is not just yours anymore. It belongs to both of you now. There's something beautiful in that. Memory shared is memory doubled, not in precision, but in presence. And through these shared stories, you see how memory becomes legacy, not just in the grand sense of history or heritage, but in the quiet, personal ways we live inside one another's narratives. The way your grandmother's recipe lives in your weekend kitchen. The way a phrase your friend used becomes part of how you speak. The way someone else's memory shapes your choices, even if you don't realize it at the time. And yet, even as memory expands, it also contracts. You begin to forget more, names, dates, details. Sometimes this frightens you. You walk into a room and forget why. You misplace a thought like you misplace your keys. You reread a paragraph 3 times because it won't stick. You know this is natural, but it still feels like loss. Scientists say the brain becomes more selective with age, not just because of decline, but because of efficiency. You remember what matters, emotionally, narratively, personally, and the rest, it fades. This isn't negligence, it's prioritization. Your brain, still your lifelong editor, continues to refine your story. And yes, it means some details vanish, but it also means the essence stays. You may not remember the names of everyone at that wedding, but you remember how the air smelled when you danced outside under the lights. You may not remember what year your dog passed away, but you remember the softness of his ears. You may forget the structure of a speech, but never the tear someone wiped from your cheek. And here's the strange gift. Sometimes, forgetting makes remembering sweeter. When a lost memory returns, unexpected and vivid, it feels like a miracle, a rediscovery. Like finding a pressed flower inside a book you forgot you owned. In that moment, you feel both the time that's passed and the tenderness that remains, and you realize not all memories are lost forever. Some just sleep, waiting for the right moment to open their eyes. This is also the time when you begin to create memories more intentionally. Not just for yourself, but for those around you. You plan the kind of day someone might cherish. You write letters, take photos, say things out loud that you once would have kept inside. You realize that memories don't always have to form by accident. Sometimes, they can be made on purpose, with care and thought and love. You also start to see memory as something fragile, worth protecting. You might see someone close to you begin to forget. Slowly, quietly, they lose pieces of their past, names first, then places, then timelines. It's hard to watch, but it teaches you something essential. That memory isn't just for keeping your story, it's for holding someone else's when they can't hold it alone. And so, you begin to remember out loud. You love this song. We went there together. You always used to tell that story. Your voice becomes a thread that ties them to their own life. You become their narrator, just for a moment. And in doing so, you understand something profound. Memory is not a solo act. It's something we carry together. And eventually, you think about what will be remembered of you, not in a legacy sense, not in statues or books, but in the small ways. A story someone will tell because you were part of it. A laugh that echoes in someone's kitchen. A nickname, a scent, a look. You hope that when people think of you, they'll remember how they felt in your presence. Not every word, not every detail, but the warmth, or the honesty, or the love. That becomes your quiet goal, not to be unforgettable, but to be remembered kindly, to be part of someone else's emotional map, to have been, if only briefly, a place where someone else felt understood. And through all of this, the early question still lingers. Why don't you remember your first 3 years? You smile now, gently, at the simplicity of the question and the richness of the answer, because your brain was growing too fast, because you had no words yet, because you hadn't learned how to place yourself in time, because you were still becoming someone who could remember, and perhaps most beautifully, because you didn't need to. You were held, you were fed, you were loved. You didn't need the memory to prove it happened. Your life continued anyway, built on a foundation of invisible moments that taught you how to trust, how to feel, how to begin. The forgetting wasn't a flaw, it was a gift, a clearing of the path so that all your other memories could walk forward. You don't remember being carried, but your body does, and that's enough. You're older now. You've lived enough years to know that memory isn't just something that happens to you. It's something you participate in. You choose, often unconsciously, what to keep and what to release. And even more curiously, you begin to feel the shape of memory changing again. The sharp outlines of your 20s begin to blur. Events condense. Entire years start to feel like single, cohesive moments. That was when I lived in the city, or that was my teaching phase. Time bends, flattens, loops, and memory follows. It's not that the details are gone entirely. Some are still vivid, but others have softened around the edges. You remember the feeling of a time more than the timeline itself, you might say. I don't remember what we talked about that night, but I remember how much I laughed. These are what psychologists call gist memories, general impressions of an event rather than specific details. They aren't precise, but they're true in their own way. You notice, too, how your brain starts to group memories by emotion rather than by date. When you think about a period in your life, it's often organized not by the order of events, but by how those events made you feel. A season of grief, a year of exploration, a winter that felt like hope. You begin to realize that memory isn't a calendar, it's a mood board. And the longer you live, the more emotionally arranged it becomes. At this stage, you may also begin revisiting your earliest accessible memories, examining them with the gentle curiosity that comes only with age. You start to notice not just what you remember, but what you don't. And rather than frustration, you feel wonder. How did your brain decide what to keep? Why did that conversation stay when so many others didn't? You find yourself sitting quietly with these questions, not needing answers, only appreciating the mystery. You reflect on how memory helped you survive, how, in difficult times, your brain sometimes protected you by dimming the brightness of pain, and how, in better times, it lit up moments like constellations, so they'd always be easy to find again. You understand now that memory is deeply adaptive, not just a record, but a safeguard. It smooths what might overwhelm. It brightens what might heal. And now you look around and see others walking their own memory paths. Some are sharp, alert, vivid. Others are slowing, and some are fading altogether. You watch someone you love repeat a story for the 5th time, unaware. You feel the ache of watching memory loosen its grip, but you also feel the tenderness in the moment, the chance to hear the story again, to receive it as if it were a gift, not a mistake. You learn to listen differently, more patiently, because now you know memory is precious and retelling is a kind of preservation. You start to remember for other people. You remind your partner where the keys are. You finish a sentence for a friend who's searching for a name. You tell your aging parent, "Yes, we already had lunch." Gently, kindly, in these small acts, you become a memory keeper, not just for yourself, but for the people around you. And still, the past continues to rearrange itself. You'll be lying in bed or washing dishes, and a new connection will suddenly click. Oh, you think, that's why I did that. Or, now I understand what they meant. Memory matures not just by addition, but by reinterpretation. You learn to hold old events in new light. The same moment feels different when revisited with distance, with wisdom, with gentleness. That's the quiet work of time. You might even find yourself forgiving someone, perhaps even yourself, for something that once burned too hot to touch. The memory is still there, but its edges have softened, its weight has shifted. You can hold it now without flinching. You can say, "That was hard," without needing to relive the hurt. That's what emotional resolution looks like, remembering without being wounded. And through it all, there's the strange, persistent absence of your very beginning. Those first 3 years remain blank, no matter how much you learn about them, no matter how many stories are told, you can't touch them directly. They remain the soft soil beneath the roots of your life, nourishing, unseen. But as you grow older, you feel their presence in new ways, not as missing pages, but as silent chapters that made all the others possible. Maybe someone shows you an old photo, your small hand wrapped around theirs. You don't remember the moment, but it makes you cry. You feel something, not because the event returned, but because your life did. Because some part of you remembers being loved, even if the memory has no name. You begin to appreciate that memory isn't linear, that there are many ways to remember: through emotion, through the body, through story, through silence. You remember in dreams, in patterns, in your reactions to things that make no logical sense. You remember through the scars you carry, the songs that comfort you, the food that feels like home. And just as you once stepped into memory as a child, awkwardly, slowly, one moment at a time, you begin to step back from it, too, not in fear, but with reverence. You let go of details you don't need. You stop trying to force recall. You begin to trust your brain to carry what matters and to release what doesn't. And even as memory begins to slip in small ways, something unexpected happens. You become more present. You notice things: the taste of fruit, the warmth of a blanket, the sound of rain on your window. You're not collecting the moment, you're living it. And that, too, is a form of memory, not for the future, but for right now. You know now that you won't remember everything. No one does. But you also know that the memories that define you, the ones that shaped your kindness, your courage, your curiosity, those are carried deep, beyond conscious thought. They live in the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you love. And so, you keep walking, carrying your memories like well-worn stones in your pocket, smooth, familiar, grounding, some with names, some without, all part of the story. You may never recall your first sunrise, your first laugh, your first word, but you know you had them, and because you had them, you had everything that came after. There comes a moment, quiet and unannounced, when you begin to realize that memory is no longer just about looking back. It's about what you carry forward. You're not chasing details anymore. You're tending to meaning, and slowly, gently, the weight of memory becomes less about what you've forgotten and more about how much you've lived. You might not remember the last time someone held your hand just because, or the last time you laughed until your stomach hurt, but you know those things happened. You trust that they did. And that trust becomes a kind of memory in itself, a soft, internal warmth that tells you your life has been full of light, even when the specifics blur. Now, you start to see the shape of your story more clearly. It doesn't look like a timeline. It looks like a constellation, moments scattered across years, connected not by order, but by feeling. A long ago conversation still shapes your decisions. A lesson learned once continues to protect you. A loss from childhood still echoes softly on certain days. The memory itself may be faint, but its influence is deep. The threads of who you are stretch back into years you can no longer name, but still feel. You begin to carry memory differently, not like a list, but like a landscape. You don't walk through it with purpose. You let it unfold. A familiar street pulls you toward one story. A quiet evening calls forth another. And in these moments, you find yourself smiling, not because you're clinging to the past, but because you're grateful it's still with you, in its own way. This is also when you start noticing what people remember about you. A friend recalls a small kindness you offered without thinking. A loved one tells a story in which you played a central role, and you don't remember it at all. You're reminded, with a mix of surprise and humility, that your presence leaves impressions you'll never fully witness. Your memory is not the only record of your life. Others are writing it too. And then there are the things you remember wrong. The vacation you swore was in June turns out to have been in April. The shirt you thought you wore in one photo belongs to a different year entirely. At first, this unsettles you. If the details aren't reliable, can the memory be trusted? But with time, you learn to release the need for precision. You discover that the value of memory often lies in what it represents, not in its perfect accuracy. That family trip may not have happened the way you pictured it, but the closeness you associate with it, the laughter you still feel in your chest, those are real. Your memories may change shape, but their truth is found in emotion, not exactness. And you realize that memory is a mosaic. Some tiles are clear, others are chipped, a few are missing altogether. But step back, and the picture forms, imperfect, beautiful, coherent, in its own wild way. This is when you might begin reflecting on legacy. Not in a grand sense, not in monuments or medals, but in questions as small and sacred as, what will they remember? Not they, the world, but the ones who sat beside you, the ones who heard your laugh, the ones who saw you tired, or kind, or brave. You hope they'll remember not just what you said, but how you made them feel, that you made space for their stories, that you listened, that you loved in your own language, whatever that looked like. And perhaps most of all, you hope that they will remember something you don't even recall giving, a moment of peace, a bit of light, a gentle truth that stayed with them long after you forgot you said it. And so memory becomes circular. You remember others, and they remember you. Your early years, though veiled in silence, are echoed in those who watched over you. Your middle years, though busy and full, leave traces in those who walked beside you. And your later years become softer, not because they matter less, but because they offer you a wider lens. You no longer need to hold every moment. You only need to understand the shape of the whole. You also come to see that forgetting is not failure. It's an act of letting go. Your brain releases what it no longer needs to carry. You're not less yourself for forgetting. You're more free to feel the moments that remain. And when one of those forgotten memories returns, unexpected and vivid, it feels like a reunion, a small miracle, a whisper from the past saying, "Hey, I never really left." And now, maybe, you're beginning to prepare to pass memory on. You tell stories more often, you write letters, you label photos, not out of fear, but from love. You want someone to know that these moments mattered, that you were here, that you felt deeply and tried sincerely and laughed whenever you could. You begin to view your memory not as something to preserve, but as something to share. And in that sharing, you feel something ancient and comforting, the sense that memory is not only how we live, but how we are remembered. You still don't recall your first birthday, or the first time you said "mama," or the way your room looked when you were 2. But you don't need to, because you remember the arc of your life, the kindnesses received, the wonders noticed, the times you said yes when it mattered. You don't need to remember you're beginning to feel how far you've come. And so, as you sit in the quiet of your life, whatever stage you're in, you find peace in the presence of memory, not as a vault, not as a burden, but as a companion, one that walks with you, changes with you, and, when needed, lets you rest. You remember enough, and that is everything. Somewhere along the winding path of your later years, memory shifts again, quietly, gradually, without warning. You don't notice it at first. A name escapes you, only to return minutes later. A story comes to mind, but the details have softened, like a watercolor painting left in the rain. You find yourself pausing more often, waiting for the right word to arrive, standing in a room wondering why you walked in. And yet, you are not worried the way you might have been years ago. You've come to understand that memory isn't about clinging, it's about flowing. And right now, yours flows like a river that bends and meanders, carrying with it leaves and stones and flashes of sunlight, sometimes catching on a branch, sometimes disappearing into current. The people around you start to change too, some older, some gone, others younger, growing into their own stories, asking questions, listening closely when you speak. You've become a vessel now, not just of knowledge, but of lived experience. And whether you mean to or not, you are passing that experience on, in small ways, in quiet conversations, in the way you react to the world, in the stories you still know by heart. But those stories take a little more effort now. You sit down to recall the name of a childhood friend and feel it dancing just out of reach. You can still describe the schoolyard, the gravel under your shoes, the color of the fence, but her name floats just beyond your grasp. And when it finally comes, if it comes, it brings with it a whole reel of images, like a film reel catching light again. That's the thing about memory in old age. It can be slow, but it's still full. You begin to realize that your memories have become less about events and more about connections. Not where you went or what you did, but who you were with, who stood beside you, who held your hand, who made you feel less alone. These are the memories that come easily now, the ones rooted in emotion, in touch, in presence. And sometimes, you don't remember the full story anymore. You just remember the laugh, or the silence, or the way someone looked at you as if you mattered. These aren't the grand highlights of a life, but they are the ones that stay. Because at some point, your memory stops being about telling the story and starts being about feeling it again. And when you forget, even the things you thought you'd always know, you begin to find grace in it. You say, I don't remember anymore. And instead of shame, you feel softness. Because now you know, forgetting is natural, gentle, a slow return. And remembering is not a test. It's a gift. One you no longer expect. But welcome when it comes. You begin to move through the world differently, more slowly, perhaps, but also with more intention. You notice the way sunlight pools on the floor, the sound of birds in the early morning, the way people's eyes soften when they speak of something they love. You're not rushing to store these moments away. You're simply letting them be what they are, lived, felt, enough. And as your memory loosens, something unexpected takes its place. Presence. You are more here than you've ever been. You listen more than you speak. You watch more than you correct. You no longer need to hold on to everything. You've learned that living doesn't require a perfect record, just attention, just heart. And yet, even as some memories fade, others sharpen. Childhood recollections, long buried, surface with clarity. A bedtime story, a smell, the sound of your mother's voice humming in another room, your earliest memories, the ones you thought were lost forever, sometimes return, not as facts, but as feelings. And when they do, they're more powerful than ever. Scientists still don't fully understand why distant memories often become clearer in old age, but they do. And when it happens, it feels like your younger self is whispering hello. There's a sweetness to these returns, a sense of coming full circle. You may not remember what you had for lunch, but you remember the weight of a childhood blanket, the scratchy wool, and the smell of laundry soap, and that memory warms you. Not because it's important, but because it's yours. Sometimes you wonder, will these be your last memories? You don't dwell on the question, but it visits you. And when it does, you find yourself drawn to the simplest things: the curve of someone's handwriting, the way your favorite chair creaks, the smell of soup simmering on the stove. You understand now that memory doesn't have to be monumental to be meaningful. Small is enough, and you're not alone. There are others walking this part of the journey with you, some whose memories are sharper than yours, others who no longer know the day of the week, some who speak in stories that seem to loop endlessly, telling the same tale with slightly different colors, and you love them more for it. You see yourself in them, and in them. You see what it means to be remembered for who you are, not just what you know. And when you speak now, people listen differently. They lean in, they ask follow-up questions, they say, "Tell me again." You may not always have the answer. You may lose the thread halfway through, but they wait. And in that waiting, you feel loved, not for your memory, but for your presence, for your essence, for your story, even as it unfolds in pieces. And sometimes, you still surprise yourself. A song lyric, long forgotten, bursts from your mouth while the radio plays. A name returns out of nowhere, bright and proud. A detail, a birthday, a joke, a secret nickname rises like a bubble to the surface. And in those moments, you smile, not with pride, but with wonder. Your mind is still here, still capable, still dancing, even if more slowly now. You've lived enough to know that memory isn't what defines you. It's how you love, how you listen, how you show up when it matters. The people who love you will carry your stories, just as you've carried theirs. And when you can't remember anymore, someone else will. They'll say, "You used to tell this story." Or, "You always made the best pie." Or, "She had a way of looking at you like you were the only one in the room." That's memory too. And so, you walk gently now, through time, through fog, through grace. You are still you. Even when memory slips, you are still whole, even when the details blur. And as the story continues, you don't try to capture every line. You just keep showing up, fully, softly, here. You sit by the window one afternoon, watching the shadows stretch slowly across the floor. The light moves so gradually that you can't quite tell when the change happens. It just does, as naturally as breathing. And somehow, that's how your memory feels now. Not like a library of facts or dates, but like light moving through a room, gentle, shifting, always there, even when you're not looking straight at it. The stories you've carried for decades still find their way into your conversations. Sometimes out of nowhere, without warning, a smell, a color, a phrase overheard. Suddenly you're transported, not to a detailed scene, but to a sensation. The feeling of being young and unsure, the thrill of something new, the weight of a goodbye. These emotional echoes rise up from within you like warmth from sun-soaked stone. You don't always have the words to explain it, but you know when something remembered has touched you. You feel it in your chest, in your breath, in your pause before speaking. You start to notice how the rhythm of your mind has changed. Memory no longer rushes. It doesn't arrive on command. It strolls. It lingers. It wanders into a room just as you're about to leave it. But when it shows up, it brings a fullness that only time can offer. Not just what happened, but what it meant. Not just where you were, but who you were becoming. And now, more than ever, you recognize the importance of holding on to feelings rather than facts. You might forget what someone said, but you remember how their words made you feel safe. You might forget the route to a favorite place, but you remember the breeze on your skin and the way your heart opened wide. You begin to trust that your brain, your ever-faithful editor, has kept what matters. Scientists still debate whether the purpose of memory is to preserve the past or to guide the future. But here, in this quiet season of life, you begin to think, maybe it's neither. Maybe memory is simply a way of continuing to love what has already passed, a bridge between what once was and what still lives on inside you. There are things you've forgotten that once defined you. The name of a colleague from your very first job, the exact color of your first car, the birthday of someone you knew for only a season. You let them go, not with guilt, but with gratitude. They were part of your path, and even though they've faded from your conscious mind, you know they left something behind, a trace, a turn, a lesson. You are who you are, in part, because of them, even if you don't remember why. And in this gentle forgetting, something beautiful happens. You start to make room for silence, room for presence, room for joy in its simplest forms. You stop trying to preserve every detail like a pressed flower. You let life bloom, fade, and bloom again. And in doing so, you realize memory was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be alive. You might find yourself keeping a journal again, not to document every day, but to catch passing thoughts before they float away. Sometimes just a line or two, a dream, a quote, a moment that made you laugh. And in the act of writing it down, you offer yourself a tiny anchor, a way to gently tether the moment to your future self. Other times, you may let the memory go completely. You sit with a book in your lap, reading the same page 3 times before realizing you've lost the thread. You close it and smile. You've been somewhere else, somewhere softer, and that, too, is enough. You begin to value repetition in a new way. You tell a story again, and no one interrupts. They smile because they've heard it before, and they love that they have. You listen to the same song, not because you forgot you played it yesterday, but because it brings a comfort that repetition allows. In a world where so much changes, familiar memory becomes a form of grounding. And still, you are surprised sometimes by what returns, by what sticks. You pass a tree and remember the sound of chalk on a schoolyard. You hear a whistle and think of a friend's laugh from 30 years ago. You taste something new, and it reminds you of something old. And you marvel at how your mind continues to find hidden corners where memory rests like a cat in sunlight, quiet, warm, unexpected. You've also come to understand the strange tenderness of being remembered. When someone calls you by an old nickname, when they recall something you taught them, when they bring up a moment you forgot you gave them. It's humbling. It's soft. It's proof that you are part of stories you'll never fully know, that even as your own memory gently loosens, you live on in others, and so you let go, not of everything and not all at once, but you release the pressure to hold it all. You open your hands to make space for now, for peace, for whatever memory decides to visit next. Because the truth is, even if you forget what day it is, even if you lose track of conversations, even if your mind feels more like a foggy forest than a well-lit archive, you are still here. You are still whole. There's a deep reassurance in that. in knowing that your value doesn't come from perfect recall, it comes from presence, from love, from simply existing in this moment with as much grace as you can. So, when you lie down to rest, when your eyes grow heavy, and your thoughts begin to wander, you don't chase them. You let them drift. You let memory arrive, or not. You allow yourself to sleep without needing to remember, because sleep, too, is part of memory's rhythm. It's where your brain files the day, sorts the feelings, and gently lets go. And tomorrow, if you forget what you dreamed, that's okay. What matters is that you lived it. You wake one morning and the room feels unusually quiet, not just outside, but within. There's a kind of hush in your mind, a stillness you've grown familiar with. It doesn't frighten you anymore. You've learned that silence is not absence, it's spaciousness, a place where memory can breathe. You move through your morning like you've done 1,000 times, perhaps without remembering the exact count. You put the kettle on, fold the blanket, glance out the window. You don't rush. You don't remind yourself of what you need to do next. You simply do it. Muscle memory takes over, gentle and practiced. Your body remembers things your mind no longer needs to carry. Later, someone calls, a familiar voice, a question about the past. Do you remember when You hesitate. The answer doesn't come right away. But something else does. A laugh, not from the memory, but from the moment you're in now. Because even without remembering the event, you remember the person, the warmth in their voice, the shared connection. And that's enough to make you smile and say, maybe not the details, but I remember you. You've learned that memory isn't a library to be kept in perfect order. It's more like a garden. Some things you planted long ago are still blooming. Others have gone to seed. A few have taken root in places you didn't expect. And occasionally, something beautiful sprouts from soil you thought was empty. You find joy in these surprises. You don't need to understand them fully to appreciate them. You've also discovered the comfort of letting others carry parts of your story. Friends, family, even strangers, people who remember a version of you that you might have forgotten. And when they share those memories, it's like holding up a mirror you didn't know you needed. You see yourself reflected back, not as you are now, but as you once were, laughing, curious, full of plans. And even if that part of you feels distant, it's still yours, still real. Sometimes, memory visits in dreams, vivid, immersive, almost too real to question. You wake up with a trace of something powerful, an old house, a lost friend, a long ago afternoon, and for a moment, it feels like you traveled back. You don't try to hold on to it. You simply lie there, letting it fade, like morning mist. You've come to trust that what needs to stay will stay, and what leaves does so with grace. And as your memory shifts, something else deepens. Empathy. You understand now how fragile and sacred it is to hold on to what you can. And when others forget, names, places, faces, you don't correct them. You sit with them. You walk their loop, even if it circles the same story 3 times. You've learned that repetition isn't always confusion. Sometimes it's comfort. Sometimes it's a way of saying, this is still mine. You've come to love the small, steady rituals of remembering, touching a photograph on the shelf, humming an old tune while washing dishes, saying the name of someone who's no longer here, just to keep them close. These acts are quiet and ordinary, but they shimmer with meaning. They're threads in the fabric of who you are, woven not with clarity, but with care. You no longer worry about keeping everything straight. If someone asks you about a year, a place, an event, you might say, I don't know. And that's okay. There's strength in admitting what you've let go of. You've earned the right to release details that no longer serve you. You carry the essence now, the flavor, the feeling, the heartbeat underneath it all. Sometimes you sit in silence and simply let memories come, not digging, not fishing, just allowing. One by one, they rise, a bicycle ride, a moment of awe, the sound of your own child's first laugh. These are the echoes that stay with you, not in high definition, but in softness. You don't need every word, just the sense that it mattered. And if you lose even those one day, if memory slips further, you know now that your story doesn't disappear. It lives in others, in the people you've loved, in the lives you've touched, in the way someone stirs their tea the way you used to, or smiles with your old grin, or tells a joke they learned from you without even realizing it. That's memory too, just traveling a different path. You find yourself saying thank you more often, not just to people, but to moments, to songs, to ordinary days. You whisper it when you sit in the sun, when a breeze smells like spring, when you remember something small but sweet, a phrase, a look, a kindness. Thank you for still being here, for still remembering. And when your memory falters, when you reach for a name and come up empty, you don't feel less. You feel more tender, more human. You look into someone's eyes and say, remind me. And they do. And that too becomes a shared memory. Because in the end, memory is not just what you keep. It's what you pass, what you echo, what you trust others to hold when you can't. So you rest more often now. You breathe deeper. You sit longer in the quiet. And as the light shifts again, like it did on that first morning, you close your eyes, not to forget, but to feel, to listen, to let your memories drift gently like leaves in water. You've lived fully. You've remembered deeply. And when you couldn't remember, you loved anyway. That is more than enough. The room is quiet now. Outside, the day has softened into a gentle hush. Shadows long, colors muted, the world winding down just as you are. You're lying still, eyes half closed, and your breath has found its slowest rhythm. Everything about this moment invites you to let go. Not in a hurry, not all at once, just gently, gradually, the way twilight slips into night. You don't need to think anymore. You don't need to remember anything. There is nothing to solve, nothing to rehearse. You are not late for anything. You are not missing out. You are here, and that is enough. All the memories that stayed and all the ones that drifted away, they've done their part. They've built you, carried you, held you in moments when you weren't sure who you were becoming. They made you laugh, helped you learn, shaped your voice and your steps. And even if you can't summon everyone, they're still inside you, woven deep. And now, it's time to rest. You close your eyes a little more. The edges of the day blur and soften. And somewhere, maybe in your chest, maybe in your dreams, you feel something familiar, a sense of peace, of home, of being enough, even in quiet forgetfulness. You don't need to carry the story anymore tonight. Let it carry you. Sleep well. You've remembered beautifully. You've lived fully. You're safe now.